Thank you very much.
Thank you.
By the way, the color coordination of the green and the blue doesn't mean that I'm the green person, but right, yes, okay. So we had a difficulty thinking about what the title of the talk would be, and the reason it's called critical cartography, mapping and community assets using mobile methods is critical cartography comes from an interest of mine and Ellen's, I think. And my final argument will be actually there are limitations of these mobile methods, the walking interviews, and we've been talking about this several times already today. We need to combine the different methods, but the different epistemologies, because effectively critical cartographies comes from a very different origins. It's a political economy, basically. It's all about shifting power relations and transforming the way that we not only represent the world, which is the first stage, but the way we try to transform the world and transform the representation firstly through cartographies. Think about the way the world is mapped. So what we're trying to do here is to pull together the critical cartographies literature with the mobile methods. And the mobile methods, particularly, for example, walking interviews, it's been said it's a phenomenological one, but it comes effectively from ethnography and from anthropology. So it's different. So what we're going to be looking at now is a bit about the project background of migrants health, which is actually a shorthand for a much longer title. We look at then the way that we've used walking interviews and take a selection from Barnet, which I asked Alla if he could do that because he did a wonderful job with the walking interviews in Barnet as a community researcher. And then how we look at how the walking interviews or mobile methods more broadly combined with critical cartographies. Now, first of all, just to say, cartography has a long and very controversial history, of course, supporting oppressive power and the dispossessed, and has been discussed by a number of critical geographers in particular, as not only representing but actively recreating a world with a certain power relations. And I needn't turn to you now about a certain person who's very busily trying to recreate the world in his image, effectively. But in let's say in a challenge to critical cartographies, we have a whole range of critical decolonial, abolitionist, feminist perspectives on how cartography can be utilized to, in fact, challenge and erode dominant narratives. And this can be done at a global scale, but also you can do it at the urban scale. And I've worked a lot on Henri Lefebvre and his concept of the right to the city. And I would say critical cartographies is also part of that challenge to the right to the city. So with critical cartography, we have linking maps to political power and instrumentalizing their critical agency for making invisibilized structures and hidden injustices visible. And cartography aims to contribute to the emancipation of the oppressed social groups, starting with people who are in their own, talking to people and understanding what their own lives are about and what they see as being their key struggles. And this can come back also to what, we can pull in with what Tico was saying, is that we need to also listen to what people see as their own struggles, see as their own key identities. We shouldn't assume them. Now, the title, let's say, of this MIGREF health project, which we have to give a shorthand to, otherwise we'd never finish giving a title to it, is called Co-Creating Asset and Place-Based Approaches to Tackling Migrant and Refugee Health Exclusions. And I know that there are several members of the team online. So it's 3 universities in particular, Middlesex, Greenwich, and Anglia Ruskin. I'm going to be fairly brief about what the project is about. What it's seeking to do is to combine a critical cartography approach, although those of us who are working in it probably hadn't thought of it before, but we're now suggesting it does at adopted with mobile methods such as the walking interview for the identification of health-related community assets across 12 sites in London. So we have 4 sites in London, 2 in the north, 2 in the south, and 8 in the east of England. And assets could be anything, you know, they could be health assets, they could be housing. Food is very important, as we've seen. I want to, you know, talk about that. Green parks, which we've just been talking about, where a lot is made about the benefits of parks. But we've just been saying, and this is something that's come out of our project as well, is that it doesn't seem to be very important to the people we thought to. So we're focusing in this case on specific migrant groups. So in each of our 12 sites, we have 4 key groups: Afghans, Syrians, Ukrainians, and Hong Kongers. And then we have another 2 in each site who are different. One is EU and one is not EU. I'm not going to go into the details, but just to say, these are the groups we're looking at. So we're largely, you could say 4 of our 6 groups have come in through one form of refugee resettlement. The project goal is to make sure that community assets used by local communities are collaboratively identified, and this is what we're using the walking interviews as a first step, and better supported to help improve the health outcomes for refugees, asylum seekers, and migrant communities. The question we should be asking, of course, by the end, is to what extent can these walking interviews actually contribute to that? This presentation is based on a preliminary findings from a thematic analysis of 80 walking interviews. That is 80 interviews that have been done across the 12 sites. Can I also say that when I looked up a very recent article, came out September 24 by Sun and Koo, which is a review of articles on walking interviews, and they review 26 of them since 2016. What I noticed was most walking interview articles have very few. They actually interview very few people. They range from 3 to 25. So we've done pretty well with 80 in terms of our data collection. Okay, so the walking interviews are a qualitative research method. As I said, it derives very much from ethnography and from anthropology. It's about getting a better understanding of the insights of often vulnerable groups, but it doesn't have to be just vulnerable groups, but it's often focusing on vulnerable groups. And it can also be about giving confidence to those individuals that you are actually conducting a walking interview. That's why it's called a mobile method. So it's having a closer interaction. And again, this comes back, I think we can link it with the interviews that Tico was talking about. How do we fit that into some of the issues you're talking about? How do the interviewer and the interviewee actually engage through walking interviews? And I think I really found that your talk raised a lot of issues that we can bring into this. So this is a case of where the participant and the researcher walk together, typically through environments which are relevant to the research topic. So we're talking about, in this case, because it's a place-based project, it's their local environment. What is meaningful to them in their local environment? Now, I think you can read from this, but I need to do this from here. Am I still doing this, or you're? No, you do that. Okay, great.
So I have the privilege to be one of the peer researchers. My work was based in environment here, and I was focusing on Syrian people. Also, I have interviews with Ukrainian peer researchers at various project sites conducted walking interviews, during which participants identified essential community assets related to food and nutrition, housing, and access to services. As part of the photo voice method, we also captured images to document our findings.
Yep.
So in this slide, I made it as the process of conducting a walking interview. I categorize it into 3 phases before the interview, which is recruiting the samples for the interviews, finding the right candidates, introducing the research to them, and explaining for what purpose it is and the outcome of it. Also telling them how we are going to conduct the interview, which is walking interview, and will be recorded. Then I made the route plan to familiarize myself with the distance and the area that we are going to have the interview in. Also, I made sure to check the forecast, the weather condition in case it is like very cold or rainy. So to be like having a good quality of interview. For health and safety purposes, I conducted a risk assessment before each interview to avoid any risk that could affect the interviewees and the interviewer. During the interview, before we start, I asked them to sign a consent form. Then we start the mocking interview. I used my mobile phone to record the interview. Also, I used a recording device just to have a backup in case I lost any of the data, to have something to back up with. After we finish the interview, I have the 3rd phase, which is transcription into the interview into English. If it's in English, otherwise I have to translate it first and to transcribe. Finally, writing the report with the reflection of the interview and submitting all the documents that I created and captured to the app. So after we finished all the interviews, we had overall observation. So migrant and council supported housing like Ahmed and Oksana experienced greater stability compared to those in private rentals like Nasreen and Samir, though visa and rent concern remained pressing issues. Safety perceptions varied among migrants, with many opting to avoid unsafe areas or limit nighttime outing as a precaution. Food culture played a central role in their adaptation process, requiring a delicate balance between affordability and maintaining cultural continuity through familiar ingredients and traditional dishes. Here we have an example about food. So I had an interview with Ahmed, and he referred to some types of vegetables as Arabic vegetables or Syrian vegetables, because it's the same type of vegetables he used to have back home. For example, zucchini and eggplants, which looks different from the one we buy in English stores. Also, in his case, Ahmed used 2 shops like Aldi and Turkish shop, which is next to each other, and the close distance between these 2 shops was a helpful factor in choosing which items to buy from each store based on the variety and the prices.
Okay. So
now this is a quote from Samir. He uses the Afghan shop, and he says a cheap and affordable price compared with other stores, £1 for each basket. So if after the interviews, we analyze the valued facilities that migrants in our interviews consistently emphasize the importance of accessible, supportive spaces in easing their daily lives. First, housing and council support. Council-assisted housing played a vital role in providing stability, particularly for Ahmed and Oksana. Barnet Council and Citizen Advice Bureau were highly valued for their legal advice, benefits, guidance, and rental assistance. Local food markets and ethnic stores. Access to affordable supermarkets such as Aldi and Sainsbury helped ease financial strain while offering convenience. Specialized and ethnic shops, including Turkish, Syrian, and Ukrainian markets, enabled migrants to preserve their cultural food traditions. Cafes and social spaces contribute to mental well-being, providing a sense of community and familiarity, especially for Nasreen and others.
Can I just, before we come on to this next picture, just to say there's been a big discussion about assets and not just what you think of formal assets, that places like barbers shops and cafes where people meet is an asset of that may produce well-being, partly because they're able to engage with others. Now, I have a Turkish Cypriot shoe mender, and when you go in there, you would find there's old Caribbean guys who just sit there all day and talk to them. So again, they're not necessarily, they don't have to be ethnic based, but it's just that, and barber shops have become now, there's been a huge expansion of men's barber shops, I noticed, we've all noticed in, I'm not sure just in London, but these are not just cutting hair, these are places you can go and talk, have something to drink. So these are also social assets because they play into well-being. Yeah, so sorry to interrupt them.
So here is a quote from Nisreen. She says, this cafe is a break from responsibilities, pressures, and loneliness. Nisreen goes to this Turkish cafe, which is one of many cafes in her area, but this one serves like coffee and desserts, very similar to the Syrian, so that's why it's her favorite choice. To continue with valued facilities, libraries and digital services. Libraries like Colindale Library provided essential resources such as printing services and book access, supporting both adult learners and children's education. Digital services, particularly WhatsApp groups for Ukrainian advisors, enabled faster and more efficient access to guidance and support. Then we'll talk about public transport and location benefits. Proximity to underground station, for example, Colindale station, played a crucial role in daily mobility, making works and school and services more accessible. Some migrants, such as Oksana, appreciated living near police station, which reinforced their sense of security in unfamiliar surroundings. We also covered housing issues. Persistent challenges despite available resources, while migrants benefit from various support systems. Significant gaps in infrastructure and accessibility continue to create barriers. Housing security and rental challenges, uncertainty in tenancy renewal causing stress and instability for Oksana and Ahmed, making long-term planning difficult. Landlord discrimination and high deposit requirements made securing housing particularly challenging for Nisreen and Samir, forcing them to navigate complex rental obstacles. Many migrants lacked clear guidance on rental agreements and also council waiting lists and eviction rights.
Next one.
Yeah. Healthcare access and GP appointments. Despite available healthcare services, migrants face significant barriers in accessing timely and adequate medical support. We have long wait times for GP appointments, caused frustration among interviewees. Online booking system were unreliable and overcrowded. Lack of specialized healthcare support presented Critical gaps such as hearing aids for Ahmed and immediate access for emergency. Language and bureaucratic barriers. Navigating legal and administrative process pose significant challenges for migrants, particularly when language barriers limited access to crucial services. While some migrants benefit from native speaking advisors, many face difficulties understanding legal documents, healthcare forms, and benefit applications, leading to confusion and delays. The lack of interpreters in essential services frequently forced migrants to rely on family members for translation, which wasn't always practical or accurate, especially in formal or technical contexts. Limited access to language inclusive support systems hinders effective communication, increasing the risk of misinterpretation and missed opportunities for assistance. So, safety and community concerns. We have some concerns like poor street lighting, made the street feel unsafe at night. Some migrants, like Samir, faced racism and visibility concern, particularly regarding hijab for his wife and public interaction. Anti-refugee protests, which happened last year, caused distress for Ahmed, highlighting continued social tensions. Now I'll hand it to Eleanor to finish our.
Okay, so what we've got from the walking interviews is, in a sense, we understand from the walking interviews what are the concerns, what's not working, what they'd like, things that cause them fear, could be the riots, could be the racism, etc. But the question I want to ask then, okay, so what? Right. So we know that, but what's the next step? And that's where I think, as the review article by Sun and Koo mentions, the question about challenging power remains, and it's not actually addressed, it seems to me, by walking interviews. I don't say it can't be, but I think that what the walking interviews do is identify what are the problems, but it doesn't really, unless you take it one step forward, and this is my position on it, it doesn't really do anything about challenging the status quo. Okay, there's several things that can happen. You may, in fact, give confidence, because one of the things we know that has happened from what some of them have said, including what some of yours said, it gives them the confidence because someone's talked to them. It gives them maybe the confidence to be able to speak up. So it might give them the confidence to challenge, but at an individual level. You can also present the data, which is what we're about to do next week, the week after, to two of our local authorities, that is Barnet and Islington. We're going to say to them, okay, these are the issues which have been raised, but my point is, next, where do we go next after this? And that comes back again, that although we can talk about walking interviews being an opportunity to listen to participants' points of view, my final point is, where do we take it next? And that's where that comes back to what I was arguing earlier on, and that a number of papers actually also argued. But it goes beyond combining methodologies. I think it comes from combining epistemologies as well as methodologies. And I think if we are interested in challenging the world as it is and trying to change it, then walking interviews is only the first step. That, as I say, is my personal contribution, right? But so I'm saying that this is often the case with a lot of creative. Thank you very much.
Are we taking some questions now, or
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we've been doing that so far.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Nejla. Oh my goodness. Okay. I want to ask you how the conversation was with the people you walk. So was it one-to-one, were you walking? Did you have to probe a lot, or were they just talking?
So I introduced the research to them on the purpose. Then I went through the questions just to make them familiarize with what I'm going to ask them. And then we went one by one. We had a walk like between 35 to 45 minutes. Depends on the locations we are going to. So I had a list of questions, but we tried to talk more as much as we can and to collect as much data as we could. I wouldn't say was a formal one. It was both formal and informal. Like it was a walk with two people asking questions and talking just to make it easier for them to think and answer without hesitation or without any stress.
Oh, then we've got two over there, and
I'm going just in order, like this.
Thank you. So I'm gonna first question is for Ala. So in Bradford, in my research institute, there's a research that is peer methodology as well. So they had 10 peer researchers to do walking interview. Each one had to do 2 interviews. 20 interviews in total. So they have got 200 interviews. But when it was evaluated and the peer researchers were asked, the answer seems to me kind of like the peer researchers is just saying what the researchers are saying about what or the research is about. Does that make sense? Like the peer researchers, it was a bit difficult for them to kind of get to talk about what worked and what didn't work, in their role as peer researchers. So I wonder whether you also have your own kind of thought about walking interview, about what you think worked and didn't work about that from your own perspective as peer researchers.
So before we conducted these interviews, we had training. And with that training, we made interviews with each other. Then we have made a demo with someone from family. And from our observation, we noticed what worked, what did not work. Then I started to do the interviews with the actual samples, which every time I do an interview, I feel like I'm more confident. I can have a very successful interview with this person. Besides, from my experience, from my own experience, all the people that I interviewed, they had the sense of wanting to participate, and they also wanted to give their voice. They feel like this is a good chance for us to speak up and to talk about the situations, and especially with the housing and food and other assets. So they wanted to speak up in terms for giving their voice. Also, they feel they want to participate. Maybe they would help someone else with the research. So I feel like everyone had made a very good contribution to the study.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes.
Thank you. This is such an exciting project, and you mentioned the routes. It looks like you decided on route, and then your participant followed the route, right? Why wasn't it other way around? Why did the participants not themselves come up with an idea?
So it was their ideas.
It was their ideas.
But I wanted to familiarize myself with the route.
Okay.
So I made a route plan. So just to make sure that it is the locations that we are visiting within a walking distance. Otherwise, if we are going to use public transport, so I arrange all of that. For example, one of the people I interviewed, they use a Turkish shop and use Citizen Advice Bureau. Also, he goes to a Syrian shop, which is like 45 minutes by car. I cannot conduct that interview going to the Syrian shop. So I needed something local to be able to walk with him, to visit that place and to record that interview. So they choose the places within, whether it was like a GP or for food or for legal advice. And I made a route plan for myself to familiarize the area and to know where to walk with them.
But if it was like too long, then you would have said, no, it's not possible. Very cool to record.
Well, like I need something reasonable to do that.
Can I just interject a moment? Because here it's interesting in this project. We have Armenia, who was one of the trainers of the community researchers doing the walk-in interviews. And also I did also the analysis of the walk-in interviews. And I can say that this approach, so the practicalities was a suggestion that was given also during the training.
Yeah.
So don't do things that also for safety and security, don't do
Yeah.
things that maybe the participant will take you by car and you have to drive out of London. So there was a sort of a point around this, making it feasible for you and the participant. And in relation to the route that Ala did, and which I really liked, that there was a margin of creativity whereby each community researchers then implement after the training, the 2-3 days training. There was also flexibility in how they wanted to implement in the details. So this approach of familiarizing and having the route on Google Maps, it's his own liberty and creativity and approach to do this.
Can I have one follow-up question?
Yeah, of course.
Because critical cartography, I never heard the term critical cartography. I find it so exciting. Do you use those maps, the route maps, in the end also to create that cartography, or do you also analyze the images of the routes, screenshots of the Google map?
So from my point of view, I wanted, because I'm the one who makes the interviews, who is in the first contact with the samples. And I wanted to share everything with the researchers who are not with me, not only to send them like the recordings and the transcript. I wanted to give them the sense as if they did the interview themselves. So I was trying to gather all the information I could and put it in like in a report, and I write even my own reflection about the interview and send it over to them, just to give all the information that I have collected from each.
Yeah, the last question. I also did walking interviews as part of my PhD fieldwork, and so in my case it was more unstructured and non-linear as well. Just like you, I had prepared when I was preparing for my fieldwork, I wanted to like set up a route. I wanted to familiarize myself with the route and all that. But when I went there, it was not possible because of context, because I was working in indigenous community, and I just told them where I would like to be taken, and then I just left the whole thing with their leadership. So I just told them, would you be able to take me to Lake where you go fishing? And they would take me to the place, and then we'd be walking, and we would like, on our way, we would, they would stop and be like, oh, you want to try this berry? Oh, this is a medicinal plant. We use this for so and so. So it was like without me having to ask any questions or probe, without any prompts, the conversation was just like went on and on and on. And even when we stopped the mobile part, there was a bit of sedentary part as well, where you just like sit down by the lake and then chat for a while. So it went beyond the purpose of interviewing. So suddenly the point became building relationship, building trust, and like disrupting the power relations, and I also noticed that they started to become less optimistic
and more vulnerable, because sometimes, you know, there's like this acting in a socially desirable way. Sometimes they talk the things that ideally a researcher would want to hear. So that was just phasing out, and the real vulnerability was kicking in. So I think that's sort of the advantages of mobile methodologies.
I could add something like for planning the routes, like we also like sometimes we have to cross the roads, and I need to know when I need to pause speaking for health and safety. Also, if someone like he chose to go to a next door shop, it's like it won't be a working interview. Like I can't conduct that with them. I need to know that it's like a reasonable space distance that I could work with them to that place, so we could make like a successful one.
So in my walking interview, I tried to record the first one and it was not working. So all 3 of my interviews were unrecorded. So I had to come back and like put it down in my field notes. So that's sort of the disadvantage, but that's only from a researcher's point of view. But I feel like the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. Yeah.
I think you better. Time is up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, so I think
You have
Armenia.
I can ask later if we're going to the next
Yeah,
presenter.
we can maybe, if we have time at the end. We can
before, right? Minutes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Emilia.
Yeah, so the next and last but not least, Armenia Colucci, who is a professor of behavior psychology and cultural and global mental health here at Middlesex, and also one of the PIs on what she just talked about, but you're not going to talk about migrant health. She's talking about art-based and visual methodologies in mental health and suicide.
So we have a very
research.
jolly last paper.
I will try to make it as joyful as possible. And well, actually, it's interesting because there's also a lot of conversations about some topics which I will touch briefly, some things I will skip because we were very nicely, even better covered by other speakers. And so that's very nice. And I will give a little bit of when this works, kind of an overview of the reasons why I started using this kind of methodology, and also some examples from my work in this area, kind of dividing my work into 2 main area, the arts-based visual, like more as ethnography, and my more participatory work, as some was mentioned before. I think we're ready. Yeah, I have as always too many slides, so I'll just go across them as I see what is not very relevant. So just giving a little bit of a tutorial for this. The kind of, as any methodology, it is always important to think about, where they come from, what is epistemology, what is like, the historical background of any methodology. So I like always to start with this quote by Levi, who said that the story of arts-based research practices is one about holistic approaches to research, and this one that began at the intersection of social justice movements, theoretical advances, and paradigm expansion. So as you will see on the work that I do, and I believe many of you, as I heard today, have already spoken about, does fit within the kind of more social justice kind of work. Now, there is different definitions, different way of looking at what are art-based methods, what are art-based inquiry, and just giving you some, this way I kind of presented. In art-based inquiry, art forms are essential. And the key point in this kind of practice is around the essential, being the main or the only way of doing research, at least in my context, in different phases. From formulating research question, like assessing community needs, deciding what actually is going to be the particular area of research, which questions we are addressing, collecting data or generating data, analyzing data, presenting, disseminating the finding, and as research findings in itself. One of my initial papers I wrote about this, I spoke about art as a way of knowing and showing. kind of summarizing what I just spoke about. There are different ways, so different art forms can be used in research. Maybe one of the examples you will be more familiar with is something like drawing. In these particular examples here, it was from a project some time ago around youth suicide in Japan, where I asked participants to kind of use manga. Manga, as you will know, is something which is very kind of culturally present in Japan and Korea, and it's how people are familiar with. So using that kind of a culture art form in some ways to investigate something very sensitive as youth suicide. So this public drawing is one of the methods which has been mostly used. You want to be more familiar with. We can use poetry, photography, film, music, dance, theater. Realistically, we can use, I believe, any art or any art forms. I'm currently working with my colleagues here in MDX on a book, the visual psychology, which is going to be published next year. It's an handbook by Rutledge, where we are looking at different kind of methodologies and what people are doing. It is interesting to see about, even today, speaking with Nilam here at MDX, our director of research, she's using textile. And I now am playing with using ceramic for something around clay as a form of research. So realistically, they can be used in many different methods. And it's not unusual for one art form to be used, for example, in the first stage of the research, formulating research questions, and another art form to be used later. So the process itself is very creative in terms of what we use, when, for what reason. Before there was a question which was interesting about why we're using these methods, and of course it's a lot of potential advantages, and it would be nice to understand more fully about those in this room who have started using more innovative, creative methods, what has brought us there, and I will give you my reasons for this. So just giving some of them, art, as we heard today from the previous presentation, and creative methods, including visual methods, are very powerful mediums to explore in depth and include a marginalized and even silent perspective within what we can call an activist way of doing research. It can be inclusive of people who are unable to use or maybe not use it so efficiently, writing and reading as a primary means of communication, which can be true of many migrants from a non-English speaking country like myself, or sometimes that we cannot quite express what we want to say in another language. So this can be, for example, an example of being more inclusive. Can allow access to multiple and complex meanings and system of beliefs that might be otherwise inaccessible. Can make the report of the outcomes easier, more effective, impactful, accessible, also exporting digital channels. Can challenge, preconceive the dominant perspective, like we heard this morning, so the status quo, what you are told, that is the way to, the concept of the knowledge we've been given so far. I put myself in that as well, because I don't put in a Western label, talking about the kind of race and belonging. As an Italian, I actually don't sit very well with some of the languages used from English-speaking countries, which is also unfamiliar to my own culture. New perspective and understanding cannot always be translated into words and or numbers. It can also build high level of intimacy, also following the presentation before about interviewer social practice, also kind of creating empathy, mutual understanding, reducing distance between what is the research, who is the researcher, and and the person who is with the research on or with. And also has very strong transformational capabilities. And finally, it's very ideal, I believe, to engage participants in a more empowering process through active agents. I'm going to be talking later more about participatory methods. Now, there is, and I believe also that this is one of the main reasons I became very interested in using arts, because the appeal is beyond academia. So it's a turn towards a more artistic, visual, digital forms or representation that brings the research to broader audience, to people who actually don't have access to what is more academic research. Now, as for any research method, there are a lot of advantages and a lot of limitations as well. Some of these already were mentioned. This before somebody spoke about, it's very time consuming, and that's certainly a case, we can all say that. Also, there is, as we also know, not much guidance. In fact, for some method, there is almost no guidance. When I started, there was no guidance at all, particularly in terms of how we analyze, how do we report this data, what do we do, how do we make sure that we actually are achieving the aims, or try to go towards achieving the aims that we promise to the people who take part in this kind of research. Funders, sometimes colleagues, might not understand fully the value of doing this kind of research. Being unconventional, ethics committee might be not familiar, and can also be challenging both to work with ethics, but also for some participants, that was mentioned before, some of them might not want to do this kind of research. And the researcher needs to learn new skills, including interpretation skills if you're doing more workshop-based approaches. However, in spite of the main limitations, many more that are out there, which also came out today, I can say that in my perspective, in my own experience, art and visual methods can be employed as a powerful tool for activists in applied research in mental health and suicide, as well as other areas. Now, just before I move to visual methods, which is going to be my focus, I want to mention about some kind of way in which we can use the same research approach, the same kind of research methodology in two different ways, in different stages of research. So on your left side, you can see an example where we used what is called forum theater, a community-based theater, to generate data, promote social change in a research around domestic violence among Indian communities in Australia. So where here the short plays created with the community members were used to go into communities and try to understand about what is domestic violence in these communities and what are ideas from the community itself about how to stop domestic violence. In the second example, forum theater was used as a way of presenting the findings, more for applying, more for kind of knowledge transfer. The research was done using something called the Delphi method, which is an expert consensus method. But then the findings were put together to create different kind of tools, which then were used for trainings using this kind of community-based theater. So kind of same methodology or very similar methodology, but in two different stages of research to generate data and to present findings. Okay, so this is just to say there is not one way to use a method and there are different purposes. Now I'm going to be focusing for the rest of my presentation on visual methods in particular. And just to give about more understanding about why I become interested, I actually was trained completely quantitatively in Italy. I did a master's in advanced statistics, so I was very interested in numbers. But so initially I started using art more as a way of complementing my research outcomes, where I was using both quantitative and qualitative methods. When I was doing research in North India about spirituality and suicide, I started using my camera to film something, photographing something, and then this kind of more kind of artistic aspect was sitting kind of in the side of my kind of academic work. So in this case, I did a short documentary about my research in Haridwar. I also did an exhibition about Haridwar, but it was something that's sitting next to it. But then, paraphrasing what Roger Canals wrote, I did not want to incorporate image in anthropological and psychological discourses, but I wanted to make use of the image as method and film as a process of discovery and change. This shifted very largely about the way I approached this kind of methodologies and what I was doing with it. So I then retrained as a visual anthropologist to use ethnographic film as a standalone research and dissemination public engagement method in mental health, to what we can define as an applied public and activist visual anthropology and visual psychology, which is the title I gave to myself when I became a professor. So more or less, I'd like to use the definition of film as research for change, because the objective is change, and the film is a tool for that. So I started something called the movement, which you can look later. The example I'm going to be giving now, as others I won't have time to give, you can find most of them in this website, in this blog. You can actually also receive updates, which puts together this kind of work. So my first research project, which was completely based on visual method, was called Breaking the Chains. And it's an ethnographic documentary about human rights issues in Indonesia. So it's nice to have an Indonesian in the room because I can say pasung, and somebody actually knows what it is. So just to say, there is not a definition, an official definition of pasung, but it's kind of a practice, which is an example here, quite widespread in Indonesia, but also in other low and middle income countries with other names, of physical contained and restraint of people with mental health issues. I did this project with different kind of components. One of them was a more observational style of ethnographic documentary that explored the cultural meanings and function of pasung and follows the social and political activism in Cianjur, which is in West Java, not from where you come from. And this was the resulting documentary from this project. I also published a couple of papers, one in psychiatry and one in visual studies, where I also reflecting. So I won't have time now to cover all these reflections, but I thought it was important to reflect about the process of, for me, for making this film, and also my professionality in terms of, you know, who I was and what I was doing. So if you want to know more about this, you can read these two papers. While I was doing this research, by my friend in Indonesia, Ervita, who suggested, she suggested I met somebody called Anto, who actually I'm going to meet again tonight for dinner. I'm very excited to see him soon. And Anto had been trained several times. He was a self-taught artist and was learning to speak English to a radio broadcaster from Australia. So I went to spend some time in his house. And when I was there, because August, her name is August, and it's okay to go between Anto and August, so sorry, I will go between the two names. He was very kind of reflective himself about his practice, what it meant to him, how did he make sense about why his family had resorted to training for you know, for his mental health issues. So then we kind of started making a kind of collaborative film where the film was about him, but was made with him. And you can also watch this film called Breaking the Chains, Anto's Story. And we also put a paper together using his poetry and his drawings, and again a reflection about chaining and the freedom in Indonesia. And he's now in UK, so hopefully we'll have chances to meet him in person as well. And then several photographs have been used in different exhibitions and other work. So this kind of work then became the basis for another larger project, which was an interdisciplinary and a cross-cultural project called Together for Mental Health, which aimed to explore collaboration between mental health workers and faith-based and traditional healers in Indonesia as well as in Ghana. So we were looking into, can we actually, is it possible to have an example of good practice, basically collaborations between people like psychiatrists, psychologists, and nurses, and faith-based healers, traditional healers working together? Because my Breaking the Chains film and the work done by Ursula Reed in Ghana, what has shown that usually these kind of figures do not work together, work against each other. And this can be very harmful for the person who's dealing with mental health issues and their families. So this project was done to try to explore collaboration and using visual methods exclusively as a way of exploring this issue and presenting the data. So it's an applied activist interdisciplinary visual research project, which is based on the ethnographic documentary approach of Breaking the Chains, as well as the more participatory approaches of Funding Our Way, which I will talk shortly about. So just briefly, I don't know how much time I have left, about 10 minutes or
10 minutes, yeah.
So there was an initial stage of co-production in both in Ghana and Indonesia to try to understand about where should we go, what are we doing, so with the community. Then the ethnographic documentary consisted of a film, the field observations and interview with people with experience of mental illness and coercion or restraint, family carers, healers, mental health workers, and other key stakeholders. We used what we called a staged ethic consent, where the person had to kind of express agreement or not with every single aspect of their identity, so they could actually have choices about what to share and what not to share. Again, we have no time to cover everything, but myself and Susan Hansen, who was here this morning, have written this paper where we explain more about some ethical aspect of doing visual research, something I'm very interested to explore further in the future. And outputs were of different kind, from the documentary itself to publications, conference, toolkits, and screening guides. And these are the two main films that have come out. You may have seen some of them: Harmony, Living Together, and Kabom, A Little Medicine, A Little Prayer. Both of them are available online. If you want to watch them. And we had so much material, so that then we also made some kind of shorter films. And just 2 days ago, I received the last one, which was the last film. So they are kind of exploring some particular aspects. So they are smaller exploration of some particular rituals or a topic. Now we are about to release with the team in Philippines another documentary based on our ethnographic research around domestic violence and suicide in the Philippines. And of course, these are all examples of visual as research tools to collect data, but there is other ways, maybe more use around using visual for dissemination, for knowledge exchange. And you again can find some examples on my website. In the last very few minutes I have left, I'm going to be going through some participatory visual methods and also continuing some conversations we started before. Now, you've seen some examples, some component of this around photo voice. So I think we all know what photo voice is, but just in case somebody came online only now, it's seen as a form of participatory action research that engages a participant as a photographer who captures the photos that best illustrate his or her perspective. Some example of this research, we had one of our master's students now we're publishing a paper which is titled Exploring the Perspective about Barriers of Facilitators to Accessing and Engaging with Domestic Violence Services among Turkish immigrant women. And in this case, photo voice was used as a way of understanding what are perceived as barriers of facilitators to accessing services. We also have one of my lovely students here, Deborah, is also using photo voice. And so hopefully next time she will be here giving a presentation about her work. Interesting, actually, a couple of weeks ago only, so very, very fresh, I was invited to Edinburgh University because my friend, colleague, Clara Calia, she was doing, she collaborates with a community, an NGO of people from Syria. And wanted to kind of try to see about what will be the response of using some kind of participatory visual method with the community. So it was a very kind of very short, 2 hours and a half, very short version of using photo voice, different from what I normally do for research. And interestingly, when we ask the community, I say, okay, let people decide what they want to do this photo voice about. They chose to talk about suicide. And which happens to be one of my main topic of research. So then we did something around the suicide recovery, a concept I would like to explore. And now just showing you some of the images that they've taken. It was a very short photo voice, but people were super participating and provided some photos and captions describing what recovery meant to them, what are some issues that came to them when they thought about suicide recovery. So you can see some of the images here. And also here, and hopefully we'll have some of these published shortly. And then to conclude about some more kind of audio-visual methods, so this photo voice is obviously a method which uses still images, but as was mentioned this morning around the video diaries, we have a lot of different kinds of methodologies that use audio-visual. I'm going to be focusing in the last two because we already spoke about video diaries this morning, but just to something to kind of address about this method, but any at-least method really. We have three main categories of data. Yeah, what is data in this kind of approach? One is that the process itself of creating the artifact, creating the film, creating whatever that process itself, like in the theater project I mentioned before, we recorded and took field notes of everything that was happening while people were developing the theater plays, because that was data itself. Then the impact it has on participants, on viewers, that is also research data, as well as the resulting artifact, in my case, films, as an expression of the participant's voice. So we have a different kind of data we analyze. So giving the two last examples around digital storytelling. I don't know if you're familiar with the digital storytelling, so in case we are not, the definition given here is a research community engagement method that combines the cultural power of the first-person narrative with digital technologies and a facilitated workshop to support participants to explore and represent life experiences that are particularly meaningful to them. Okay, that's one definition of digital storytelling. Now, when I was in Melbourne University with my colleague Susan, we did a project called Funding Our Way, where we explored the stories of recovery by people with the lived experience of mental health issues and social behavior from migrants and refugee background in Australia. This project came out because as a mental health professional, I was familiar that we use recovery very extensively in the mental health literature in terms of services. But when we looked at the literature, where our knowledge was coming from, or the theory developed around recovery, where they were coming from, we saw that they were coming from English-speaking countries and usually not involving people with a migrant background, refugee background, ethnic minorities in general, and with a lived experience of mental health issues. We decided to use visual methods as a way of exploring what does recovery mean to somebody from a migrant refugee background who is experiencing a severe mental health issue. So this was the aim of the project. So we organized a series of workshops where people came to make themselves a short film about their experience, and the storytellers in this project had to do everything about the project. It was about the film, from scripting it to the voiceover, editing, using title, images, and music. And as you will see in these images here, people were doing their own work in the computer, but also had support by filmmakers in addition of us, the research team, in terms of helping them when they needed to be helped. Because mentioned before, it can be also threatening for people to be given a big task and then be left on their own to do it. So we made sure that people had the support they needed in their process, and also they could be learning skills that they could continue use later, as we saw this morning with Ala, after the project is finished, which is what gives me a lot of joy. I was planning to show you one of the films, but we don't have time, and I don't like when they show me the time I got left, so I'm gonna just skip it. But again, if you go in the movement website, you can find the examples and all the different stories for which we have given permission to show the films. Because in this kind of work, the way I work is for people who create the film to own the film, and then they eventually give permission to us to show this film and decide after this film is produced if it can be made available in different platforms. Again, as with the research outcome, there is one chapter and two papers you can have a look if you want, interested to see what are the themes that emerged. So the stories were analyzed to thematic analysis as well as reflection. And then we also followed up, going from your point before, we followed up 5 years after with the people involved in making this film about understanding what were the reflection years later, if they use this film, if they use them, how do you use them? Looking back, what would they really enjoyed about the project and what actually they wanted to do differently? Because these kind of reflections and publishing them are important for all of us to understand about what are we doing in a way which is useful, which is having a good impact, and what actually might be not as good as we thought it would be, and what we need to change. So I invite everybody here to make sure that we do publish also methodological papers about these experiences, and then go back to our participants to understand about which impact had on them. Now, as a last example, I'm going to talk about participatory video, which is like photo voice by using basically video. In this case, a group of community shapes and creates their own film, usually more as a group dynamic, and it's kind of more enacted. But in the way I also work, I do also individually for a number of reasons. And as for the other method, I found this a powerful means of documenting and sharing people's experiences, needs, and hopes from their own perspective. So in the project I mentioned before about Together for Mental Health, so we used ethnographic documentary, was the main kind of outcome of the project. But while we were in the field collecting data in Indonesia in 3 sites. In Indonesia, before doing that, I did a workshop with people from an organization called the KPCI, that's the Schizophrenia in Indonesia. So people believe the experience of in Indonesia, and they were paired with students to kind of create a story about their own experiences, and then they created some short films which were shown in a festival. And again, the films are available in the YouTube page of the website. And so building on this kind of method, we also used the film methodology to explore stories about impact of COVID-19 on people with psychosocial disabilities in Ghana and Indonesia. In this case, the research was done with peer researchers, which is something that we mentioned before, to the work that Eleanor and Ala spoke about. So we had the people from Ghana, Indonesia, with the experience of mental health issues themselves. We trained as peer researchers. They collected data using interviews around the research topic. But then we met in Ghana in person and Indonesia online because of COVID, and provided a visual mapping, developed a visual mapping of the key themes that emerged to the peer researchers' work. So then we went back in the field in Ghana, and the participants came to do the 3 days of participatory video workshop, where fundamentally they were kind of did a lot of exercises to start filming each other, recording the story, creating a story about the research topic. So you can see what is called the interview circle, where people take kind of turns in terms of filming each other, asking questions, and also doing the sound. The peer researchers then presented the key themes that had emerged at that point. So as also was mentioned before, as a method, I do believe it's important when we use this method to then kind of having some taking back to the communities and then building on, going more in depth from that starting point. So using this kind of initial visual mapping, then the storytellers were asked to create each one of them their own singular stories, representing in whatever means they wanted to, using whatever, some people are very good at drawing, others could just write some symbols, but creating something which then they could explain, tell to others what the story, what was the story they wanted to tell, what was their experience. And again, taking turns in filming each other with sound, camera, and asking questions and talking and sharing the story. At the end of this process, then the participants chose the 2 stories they actually wanted to enact, they wanted to create, and on the 3rd day, they created this story. So in this case, we see Alasan, whose story was picked, and then that was very dressed up to create the story the day after, and then we have created a film and shown to them. There is no time, unfortunately, to show the films, otherwise I had an film, but I aim to have that on my website this summer, to do many things this summer, and also to mention, I don't know, in the book, it just came out today, so I'm very happy about this book today. Some of the work about suicide is also published in this very new book, which came out today, which is a very good time presentation. And just going to, I think my time is over. You haven't taken any paper. She's been very nice to me. Thank you, Runa. Just last slide, just to mention that together with Ghana, Indonesia, we have been working very well together. We've been having support funding, which has helped us to make this work possible. So we also have, and we are just finishing this project. It's an HLC research network around developing a network for mutual learning on the potential of creative arts for mental health advocacy and activism in Ghana, Indonesia. And so we are publishing about this work as well. So if you are interested, including the reflection by peer researchers around being peer researchers. So, and that is something that I think will be of interest to many of you. Not talking about this project because it was very lovely covered by Leonor and Ala this morning, but there are different components of the project, and now is the art-based creative workshop site of this project. And my conclusions are that in my experience so far, in spite of sometimes challenges, things we are still learning how to do better, art-based method and visual methodologies, and I think particularly participatory, enable silence, marginalized, and disadvantaged groups to share experiences and advocate for change, including self-advocacy, as was mentioned before, can be empowering. Therefore, they can also generate a dialogue between and across sectors and disciplines and expertise. So allowing people who tend to not talk to each other to actually having a conversation. And they can be integral in engagement and dissemination activities to foster understanding of lived and living experiences and the related needs. So I find it as a very key role in advocacy and activist mental health and suicide research. But of course, as for any method, we are learning a lot, and these opportunities, like today's opportunity of sharing our learnings, be able to discuss about what we are doing, learning from each other, are very vital. So with that, I thank you, and Eleanor, and arrow there. So we actually are now writing this book, handbook and visual psychology. So if you are interested, go on the website and we'll be coming out in the future. Thank you.
Any questions in the room? Oh,
Like that. And like that.
so we start from, what's the name, sorry? Yeah.
I have two questions. One, would you like to talk a bit more about the analytical approaches in visual methodologies, for example, photographs? My second question is, were there any like localized methodologies when you were working with marginalized communities? Because I know I've read a couple of researches where they use like weaving or like knitting, which is something that the marginalized communities do for work, and they integrate those kind of methodologies into like something that's relevant in their everyday life, as opposed to like Western methodologies like using digital tools.
Thank you. Okay, so analysis, very big, important question. So there are different kind of research approaches and different kind of analytical approaches. So the example of the photo boys, they are, I mean, they've been analyzed mainly using thematic analysis, like the stories and across scarf, and then analyzed thematic analysis, and I think they're going to be using IPA, interpretative logical analysis. We also teach around using semiotic analysis, where you actually look at the image themselves, the meanings within what actually is in the image. So there is different way of looking at the image itself. But in photo voice, you could also that sometimes you can take back the photos in the group and having people also using as a kind of more of a photo elicitation, for example, and having people also be part of the analytical process. I have not really done that, but something I would like to use, or then people are involved in analysis themselves for the images that they or others have produced. For my ethnographic film project is a bit different, like when we did it together on mental health in the field. When we finished, it was quite extensive field work with the teams in Ghana, Indonesia. When we finished the field work, we kind of also during the field work and at the end, we kind of together looked at became different disciplines background. So together we kind of did a kind of a map about what are the key themes that have emerged, what already we can see from what we have collected. That is our initial themes, and then that became the basis on which to build the film. So it was okay. So if this one are the key themes, what are the kind of case studies? What are of the stories we have? The example we have collected. What best represents these themes? And then the films are a kind of a visual representation of that analytical process. In addition to that, we also published, analyzed, and then all the transcripts, including the description of some important visual aspects just described to help us in analysis. And they've been published as paper. Actually, this morning I signed my open access agreement for the second paper we are writing. The one in Ghana already has been published. The one in Indonesia today I signed off, so it's going to be published soon. Both of them in structural psychiatry. So that is part of the process. In terms of using more kind of artifacts, what people use locally, like for Japan, I mentioned manga. That's something which is very, very familiar. So I try to kind of play a bit with the techniques. Then I use, even in the participatory methods, although it's kind of digital, people decide what they want to use. So some people actually were, one of our Chinese participants, which I wrote a chapter about, she was doing origami, which is something that she was doing every day, was part of what she did. And then she bought that, she spoke about that and took photos of the origami to be part of the story. So it was spaces where people can bring, another person was doing brooches, and the film is also about his brooches, and because that's what he was doing. So there are ways to use digital that integrates what people do in their daily life. But I am very interested, as I mentioned before, Nilam's work discovered this morning around using textile in Afghanistan, and the book we have somebody from South Africa who can be writing about also textiles in the context. And I mentioned ceramic before. So I'm very interested to explore more methods, as you said, a part of people's everyday living, and they're using that as a way of expression.
Yeah.
Good question. The first, fascinating, great work.
Thank you.
The first question is, would it be possible to give more details about your experience of working with peer researchers?
Yes.
You mentioned a bit, but what are the challenges? Usually, you know, I know from interpreter when I do research, always be aware that everybody some way have their agenda, their perspective, and how to deal with the challenge. The second issue is doing participatory research means particular on mental health. Are you, when you do the research, do you have any expert, psychologist or therapist to deal after you finish your research or help you in order to reduce the emotional tension or amongst the participants?
Okay, so starting from the last question, I am a clinical psychologist myself, and which is an advantage. And the people I work with, like in Indonesia and Ghana, they are psychologists, the occupational therapists, the medical doctors. So obviously there is, but that's not always the case. But in some situation in themselves. But even then, when I work in a group context, I like to have another person because somebody else should be able, I work on suicide, to be dealing with any situation happening, so that I don't have to be the facilitator as well as potentially have to provide immediate support. But also the way I work with my arts-based method, I think it's important to create a safe space, but also to make sure that people are not over-disclosing. So the kind of containment, because there are some things and then sometimes it can be a bother with artists who are like community artists that work with some of which have an idea that, talking about things is cathartic. Less people talk about it. I cannot swear, but yeah, it's not very true because sometimes people want to, it can be cathartic, but in a context which then you can accompany the person. Just going and saying, I was raped when, or I want to kill myself, or whatever happened to you in a context where people might even potentially be threatening once we leave the room because the person is part of a community which exists beyond. So I think more, and it's very important to have people looking at some kind of way of supporting a person after, but also I think these spaces needs to be also be contained and be able as facilitators to very, very softly, but ask the person to perhaps talk about something privately after the session and not sharing with others in a group because they might be potentially regretting it because we can never guarantee confidentiality. We can say to keep confidentiality, but I don't think we can ever guarantee it. So that's very important. In terms of experience with peer researchers, the paper we are publishing now, and it's been first authored by Ursula Reed and a peer researcher, is exactly about the different kind of challenges and how, and all those the benefits. Also a lot of reflections about what went well and what could be done differently. And there is a lot of planning when you are working with people with severe mental illness, which is an additional element when you work in that context, also because people can become unwell, there is always support that is needed, also in more the kind of financial support, but also potentially other kind of support. So these are things we budgeted like money, and I think with funders and also university being in classes, we have very little ability to support, to provide to peer research of any kind the kind of support they really require. Then there are the peer researchers like Ala, who are really into it, and other people working in Indonesia and Ghana who really are involved in also the whole learning, and other peer researchers who might be there for different reasons, which you might not be becoming a researcher. So like any student of any of us, not all of us are, investing in the same way in what we do, and that's also part of the work, and that's just part of the way it is. So I think also selecting, if it's possible, selecting in some projects about why people are doing something, like PhD student, I go like, why do a PhD student? Are you sure? But I think it's important to be able to also, somebody wants to be doing learning these skills, to be able to support them throughout the process, which is obviously not easy when we have a lot of demand in the resources. But as much of the challenges for me is one of the, but I would say it's my most gratifying part of the work is when I actually do the research thing. It gives me very much joy to then see people also flourishing after also in Indonesia, people become researchers, and this next generation of researchers who are coming from a lived experience or whatever is the topic, and I would like to see much more research done in that way.
So I've had experiences doing digital storytelling. creating animated videos and online audio drama, mostly in sexual health. And so my question comes from the fact that in one of the project, the story, so the relationship in that particular project was that there was a researcher, I was the research assistant, so there was a research team, and then there's a group of artists, the script writer and animator, and then the community, and then peer researchers. And then what we found is that the story that we were able to elicit, some of the gatekeepers within the community don't like it.
Yeah.
So I wonder how you deal with gatekeepers. And then I still kind of trying to understand about your distribution strategy. Particularly
I like your thinking, my strategies.
circulation strategy, I don't know. Marketing and promotion, I don't know. But like, how do you kind of try to, bring this to different audience, particularly when you're talking about a fly? Usually people think that it's policy people and practice or services, So how do you try to translate or try to get into that space?
Okay, so let's start. What was the first question?
Gatekeepers.
Gatekeepers. But that's like in any kind of research, that you do in the field, there is always some gatekeeper. I mean, the part of it is getting the gatekeepers on board. So working like, in Indonesia, where we work with KBCI, work with universities that actually are very active also in the political scenes. So to have them on board to understand the method, but also creating spaces where these gatekeepers are not part of the process of creating the story. But also, I mean, if you look at Breaking the Chains, the film Pasung, I think that you see Muramid, who is been doing some work with him for 12 years now, and I think it's a very good example about how do you create trust so that you have people on board, but also try to not break that trust. So it's about the kind of balance around you give people voices to kind of express what they want to say in a way which is still going to be accepted by gatekeepers. So it's a dance. It's a dance. But there could be some issues that are very sensitive in some context. But I don't know. Have a look at the work and let me know what you think. But I think also that I'm learning new skills. So like when I go back in Indonesia to do more work, there are some issues that I think are not coming out, and I think it's important to also do more work in this context to make sure that other like religious minorities' perspective are also included. So I do make sure that the discourses don't represent just some kind of groups, gender, sexual, gender-related, and minorities that are often excluded. So that can be the exclusion of not even having some people in the room because their perspective will not be it's kind of not really so accepted. So how do we work better with that? Second question, menopause and the beautiful thing. Second question was
strategy, policy practice, yeah.
So the distribution, there is the public distribution aspect of the digital storytelling, but the video are available all online and people own them. So that's part of the strategies. People actually, it is their film and people can use them as they want. And that is part of them, people using them in all opportunities they have to take into themselves to kind of in a situation where they can potentially have an impact in the community, policy, and whatever, which is part of the peer training as well. People then continue in the discourse. So part of it, obviously not everybody, but some people have taken themselves their stories, continued working with using them in some way which is applied. So that's why it's important for people to own the film and to be able that they have access to do whatever they want with their own film. That's part of the strategy. Then other films are distributed through actually distributors. So some of them are not available online, photographic films, other are. But I'm very lucky to collaborate in different countries with people who are working very closely with the policymakers and other stakeholders, so that they themselves can in their kind of meetings, where they're involved, they are bringing this kind of work. The Pasung film was shown in Parliament in Indonesia, the part of it. I don't know, talking there, I was told about it, and that was used as a way of saying, okay, look, these are the issues and bringing a conversation. So it's about having some partners that are kind of have access. There are people who are working more in the arena, otherwise who work more as academic and don't have much contact, but having somebody on board in the group who is more in contact with the stakeholders who actually make decisions. I think that's very important. Otherwise, we risk not to be able to communicate. And again, also there, we're doing more work and to do this work better. So I'm learning how to do this better. So if you have a better strategy in the future, actually, for us, it was about how does it impact practice, like we mental and professional in our film, is about how do we then make sure that people who are working in practice in a clinical context or the context themselves, like the psychologists, psychiatrists, how are they actually exposed to these materials as part of their own training, because that's also important. And again, being ourselves in, like, at UGM in Indonesia, they use the materials for training the next generation of psychologists. So that's one way, using them as material. That's like a show quality right toolkit that they use some of the film as part of their trainings. But that's kind of part of it. So having a lot of multiple way of getting things out there. But I'm sure I can do better. We can do better and be more impactful.
Thank you.
There's a question online after. Are you still online? It was actually made an hour ago.
Oh dear.
I think I have to reduce the chat to see if I
Is this one up to the sensitive? Yeah, I think that up to taking your question, I think was addressed when I spoke about getting a safe space where you don't have over disclosure. So that's something that I do for any kind of research, whether it's qualitative or creative. And in terms of sensitive issues as well, I guess in the film itself, well, I mean, obviously it's about having people be taken to a process of consent, which is stages, as I mentioned before, where people have to make decisions about their identity, what they want to disclose. So usually after filming, there is some time between the people are recorded and the film becomes, get edited. Most of my film have been at least a couple of years before they become available in case there is something happening in between and the person feels that they don't want to be part anymore. We also make some kind of decision sometimes in terms of some content that is probably best not to be shown. With Anto film was very nice because he was able to decide what he wanted to have in the story. So after we did the filming, which he chose what he wanted to film, so it was all what he wanted to have. Then I sent Anto the transcript of the film, of everything, and I told him, okay, I liked with the red, yellow, red what you don't want to be in the film. Green, what you want, you think is important to be in your film, and leave with that thing what is neutral for you. Doesn't really matter. And he did that. So, like, he put in red, although it was already special material, but some part of it didn't want to be there. So then the part that were in red, I didn't even look at it. The green part, I made sure they were in the film. The neutral part, I placed them, and then I went back to Indonesia. We sat in a beautiful place, and we did the final film together. So ideally, that's what we will do. It's not always possible. I don't know fundings for this. It was just out of wanted to do this in a different way, and that worked. But it's not always possible to work in this way.
No, sorry.
You've done already. Okay.
So I think I can ask the last, semi-last question. Obviously, all the methods you've given us an overview of, they have similarities, they also have specificities. It also says that each project is very unique to the people, to the context.
Yeah.
So also in terms of money generation or money capturing, as they call it, when you put in a grant and the brief, how do you decide? How do you write down the methodology of the specific project you want the money for, the funding for? Is it also participatory, or it's because of your previous background, let's say in Ghana, because then you build the story in each context, so you build up on, so it's sort of a snowballing. But what recommendation would you give to which of these methodologies to be more apt in certain circumstances, how to develop them, obviously in general, otherwise we're going to be here until 6. But
yeah, it's a complex question, because like in the governmental health project came out from another project, and most of my research comes out from previous work or literature review where there is okay, this is a topic that needs to be explored. I worked always with very sensitive topics like suicide, human rights issues, and this about what could be a way to get involve people to have a meaningful conversation. I think piloting is important, like with the Syrian community in Edinburgh last week, as I mentioned, was about, okay, let's do a piloting. I was not paid. I just, they invited me to go there, paid my expenses to be there. Let's see, how they want to be curious, work with refugee communities. How do people react? Do they want to come? Do they actually, engage with the method? We tried it. We saw people was like, wanted to have more, come back. Let's do more. Okay, this method perhaps seemed to be responsive to the people. Now we're going to be trying with my student Judith to go to Lithuania next year for a conference. I'll do a workshop on suicide. And I said, let's try to use clay because in my experience working with suicide, being a very embodied experience, I think a technique, I'm thinking a kind of methodology which allows for making shapes, which is an embodied somehow methodology, I think would be very useful to do research around suicide. And in Lithuania, clay pottery is something very culturally present, has been there for a very long time, particular kind of clays. So something which I think locally is going to be meaningful. I'm going to be experimenting this as a workshop material during a conference with people with the experience of suicidal behavior and see about how people respond, see if it's something that could be used for research, and then if so, then try to then build that in the research grant application. Then I could talk about having piloted this method in a context where I want to do research. So sometimes about piloting before. At the time, it's about using what you have done before and building on that. And in the grant, you explain about that.
Sure, but there's an element of improvisation along the process.
All the time. Okay, when I was in Edinburgh last week, it was like to improvising on the spot. So I think all of us doing this kind of work, particularly participatory, you have a plan, and then normally things go completely out of the plan, and there's something ethics committee and funding body have to just accept it, because when you do this kind of research, things happen, and you have to just improvise it, do the best you can do to do the least damage possible or none to people, and getting the results that you need for your funding bodies and institutions to then having what they thinking you're collecting. But improvisation is, I think, a must for all of us doing this kind of work.
Janraj,
Okay, thank you
conclude.
very much.
I'm getting so much extra time.
We can talk
Yeah.
maybe to.
Sorry, Eleanor closed it.
No, it's just, I think.
She silenced you.
Bye-bye.
My question is this: in terms, I can see you share the authorship with the researchers you work with. No, my critiques, I have to explain this, but I'm usually I have some reservation of the term community researcher or peer researchers. It's in some way implied informal, secondary, or temporary status to people who are with cultural, with linguistic background and creating knowledge. And also that's, I feel sometimes there is often less of recognition of epistemological authority when we use such a term. And even it's not real, putting in a real academic context. We are academics, and then we are putting those who have more information about communities, putting in a secondary position. I try to find a different definition. I usually say co-researchers with linguistical skills. I don't use the peer researchers or community researchers. I think this is also part of when we talk about decolonization. We have to also use this process decolonization in terms of naming and also sharing the authority with researchers.
I mean, that's a very good point. Actually, we also in the paper we have debated about the way to label, but it can be a way of showing a different kind of level of authority. It's also true that there is different level of responsibility, because ultimately in our research projects we do have the different kind of goals, and they are different kind of goals. When I'm a PI on a research project, I am the PI. I am a person which is legally responsible for a project, which is different from other people in the research project. For me, the way about the kind of peer is also about distinguishing the kind of experience we are bringing in, because we are coming with different experiences. And one is about they are both very important, but they are different. I think not acknowledging the difference sometimes can be also a disservice because it's like we all have the same experience. We don't. Like, I do not have a good experience. I will never have a good experience of Gucci in my life. So why making him just a co-researcher? I'm a co-author who also don't have this experience, because his experience is something that actually is so valuable, which is different from mine, and it's important to acknowledge that actually that's an experience which is a very important experience which has been excluded from the discourses. So I think it's about a balance. How do we make sure that we don't just become all the same, so they all we look all the same, and then we all lose each other, but also managing power imbalances, which is definitely are there. So there's a very fine line in that. Eleanor is here next to me, so Eleanor, come. Thank you.
I think we sort of, it's like, the orchestra where each member leaves and there's nobody left. So I think you can ask informally, you can talk to each other, but I think we need to bring this to a close. And so I thank everybody who's here, and also those of you who are online, who're still online, and I hope that you got a great deal out of it. So